Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to most of you. So first of all, thank you all for joining us today. My name's Aaron Pina, and I'm the chair of the Board on Women and Minorities. The board is home not only to women and ethnic minorities, but other underrepresented groups in STEM, including LGBTQ and those with accessibility needs. Those with accessibility needs include those with physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, emotional trauma, deafness, and blindness. Today is the first part of a quarterly webinar series on accessibility called The World Through My Eyes. The second part will be held in October and will cover cognitive disabilities, so be looking out for that. 3/4 of today's panelists, though visually impaired, have an invisible disability. And it's invisible because they don't have an obvious outward sign. And what I mean by that is they don't normally use canes or other navigational aids. So the hope of this entire webinar series, The World Through My Eyes, is to bring awareness to those with visible and invisible disabilities. Today's topic is entitled, I'm an atmospheric scientist with a vision impairment, and will be moderated by AMS President Mary Glackin. Mary?
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you for your leadership on the board and to the board for getting these series going. I'm excited about it because this is another way AMS has really been focusing on how we really meet all of our aspirations around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. And part of that we really recognize has to be education of our members. And it also has to be opportunities for us to hear from our members in terms of what AMS is doing and what we could do better. So this will be, this is one part of a number of things that we're doing in this regard. So I appreciate the panelists doing it. I just want to also note that AMS has recently stood up a council on the culture and inclusiveness, culture and inclusion cabinet. And that's going to focus specifically on these issues at a broad level and also anti-racism. So you'll be seeing a lot more to come over the coming months on that. So without further ado, I want to turn to the panelists. And what we're going to do is, instead of doing a quick rundown of everybody, we're going to take a couple minutes up here and ask each of them to kind of self-introduce and to talk to us about their disability, what they can see and can't see for that. And we'll start with Alyssa Bates, who's at Sims at the University of Oklahoma. And I'll turn it to her to tell us a little bit more about that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alyssa Bates, and I am with the National Weather Service Warning Decision Training Division through OU Sims. And I work in training, so I basically I create online training materials for National Weather Service forecasters. And I've been in that job for about 6 years now, so I'm getting early career, but still going toward mid-career at this point. And I am legally blind since birth. Basically, my eyes just didn't form properly. And so what that means is I can see, but it's very limited. So basically, when I'm trying to look at something, if it's large font, then I can read it about 2 feet away. But if it's like my laptop right now, it's probably 1 to 2 feet away from me, and I can't read what's on the screen because it's just a normal font. But if it was taking up the whole screen, then I could read it, kind of thing. So I'm unable to drive and have never been able to drive. Well, we'll never be able to drive. And so that's hopefully a good representation to help you kind of grasp what I can see and what I can't. But basically, to sum it up, basically beyond a certain point, everything is blurry. So.
Thank you. We'll go next to Imadura, who's with NOAA and CEI.
Hi, everybody. I'm Imadura, and I'm what's called a supervisory physical scientist at the National Centers for Environmental Information in Asheville, North Carolina. In more understandable terms, I'm basically a climate scientist who happens to also be a supervisor now, leading the product section in the so-called Center for Weather and Climate, which produces climate data products and services such as the US climate normals and a range of paleoclimate in situ and satellite-based data sets. I am also totally blind. I have been most of the time since birth. This means I have, in my case, that I have no light perception. And so basically I see nothing. And I also should note here that I also have a hearing impairment and managed to be so committed to doing my work early in my career that I developed repetitive stress injuries. So I'm working around multiple issues. Thanks to technologies and many adaptive strategies, I'm able to do all the, accomplish the tasks that are part of my work. I walk with a white cane for navigation. Obviously, I use public transit or rides from family or friends or ride services in order to navigate and go places. I have read Braille since I entered first grade, and I use a refreshable Braille device for accessing text on the computer and on mobile devices. I also use speech output with a screen reader. And to combat or manage my repetitive stress injury, I use voice recognition software for dictation. And information that is printed or in a not searchable text format, I recognize with optical character recognition or scanning software. And then I also use a variety of alternative techniques to get certain things done that are not accessible even with all of that equipment.
Okay, thank you. We'll go next to Lily Campbell, who's at Penn State University.
Hello, I'm Lily Campbell. I'm a rising fourth-year PhD student at Penn State University. My research area is in carbon transport and boundary layer meteorology. I have a mouthful condition called oculocutaneous albinism. So I have albinism. My body fails to create melanin, which you need not only for skin color, hair color, but also to see. So basically, I can see about 2 feet away clearly without my glasses. It goes to about 5 with my glasses. And after that, everything just becomes too bright and blurry. So it's more washed out than anything. I'm about 5'5", so the ground's more than 5 feet away, and my depth perception's awful because of it. And I find trip and find uneven places and sidewalks all the time. So yeah, I don't, I rely on public transportation. I can technically learn how to drive, but I choose not to. And I think that's all I have in that regard for now.
Thank you, Lily. And then we have Mike Sands, who's with Nowcast Weather.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. So my name is Mike Sines, and I work in the broadcast industry as far as meteorology goes. I graduated with my degree from the University of Incarnate Word, and I started off interning at a news station, which then progressed into my broadcast career. And I honestly never thought it would take the route that it did. After graduating college, I was contacted actually prior by Telemundo in Oklahoma City that was seeking a bilingual meteorologist. I am fluent in English as well as Spanish, and so from there, I specifically focused on providing forecasts for a Spanish-speaking audience only. As far as my disability goes, I am legally blind. I have no vision at all in my left eye, and in my right eye, I'm considered legally blind. If you look at the eye chart, I'm about 2200, which is the big letter E. And so as far as assistive technology, I'm not able to drive, but I do rely heavily on Uber and Lyft and larger monitors and larger television screens as well.
Thanks, Mike. So this is I don't know whether the audience knows this or not, but this week, back in 1990, is when the America with Disabilities Act was signed into law. And so for people like me, that was, you know, I was well into my career at that point. But I think that, you know, a lot of the audience might think, okay, you know, all those accommodations are out there. This, you know, shouldn't be a problem. We heard a little bit from a couple of you about what technologies that you use, in particular, EMCA. It told us about some of the things, but I think we'd like to hear from some of the other panelists about what technologies that you use and how good are they really? You know, it's a lot more with all web, you know, web browsers and apps and everything else. It's a lot more than just a translation thing, as we know, in space. And on top of that, we have weather. Which a lot of us think about really graphically there. So I think the audience would love to hear a little bit more about that. So, well, let me just see if Emka wants to add anything more to what she said. If not, we'll go to Lily.
I guess the thing I have to add, since I didn't really talk about the shortcomings or things that I cannot access despite all the technology, is that the graphical information is very difficult to access in a meaningful way. There are a variety of techniques that allow people to access graphs that have been prepared by somebody who is sighted to either simplify them or label them. But the number of techniques available for someone to simply take a figure in a paper or the slide from a professor and be able to detect with assistive technology what's there is very limited. And then there are also other situations, such as in apps and websites, which I can talk about a little later, where the technology is not able to provide the access it's technically designed to when the website or app designer doesn't meet certain standards.
Okay, thank you. Lily, do you want to add to this?
So for me, I have some vision, so I rely mostly on making things larger on my screen. I currently use a 27-inch monitor, so if that's any gauge of size. And I have to be up close to see it. It's usually a couple of feet, maybe 1 to 2, depending on the day. For me, a lot of what I find assistive technology has been for is in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So I have this monocular that if you've ever seen me in person, I'm usually using to look closer at things, whether it be the board or a sign, or sometimes or most of the time actually presentations, especially in stuff like meetings and that such. I rely heavily on it's called Notability. It's an app where I put all my research papers so I can enlarge it on my iPad. Otherwise, reading research papers, I couldn't print it out and read it straight off. I can read normal font text, but research papers are different. And I have similar issues with figures. If they're not concise and there's like 8 things in a figure, it's sometimes hard for me to make out what is going on there. So I have similar issues sometimes to IMCA, but not necessarily.
Yeah, it sounds like you're fortunate that in the classroom where the blackboard's being used, you actually have a way to accommodate that, but I suspect that wasn't true for all of you. Let's go to Mike, and he's in the broadcast field, so you may have some special issues there as well.
Yeah, so definitely something that I kind of encountered, especially interning. Those of you that work in the broadcast industry are aware of, how the green screen works, and the monitors that are on the side that are probably no more than, I would say, generally they have them there about 15 to 20 inches in size, which is a generally small monitor. You have to put enough distance and space in between you that those monitors actually don't come out on screen. So when I started working at the internship, I just kind of was able to, in that point, I was really able to get a feel for the green screen because I was relying more on what I could see. As to where when I went in to work with Telemundo in Oklahoma City, one of the things they said is, we can get you a larger monitor, no problem. And so they would get a large television monitor. I would say they were about anywhere from 45. I would say it's about 45-inch television that was on this like wheel cart, if you will, at the time. When I moved on to the Weather Channel, they were able to provide those 40-inch television monitors on both sides that were mounted, and that made for a huge difference because then I was able to actually see what I'm pointing at and be able to give a more precise forecast. Doing weather on television, you're obviously not reading off the script, you're going off of what you know and just delivering that to the audience. And so being able to have that assistive technology of, hey, a larger monitor, I was able to accomplish one of my dream goals of being a broadcast meteorologist.
And it sounds like your employers were really accommodating and coming up with solutions to do this too. They really worked with you.
Yeah, they really were. I was very, very grateful that, they knew up front that I did have a visual disability. And so one of the things, when I got hired for the position, that they let me know up front was, what can we do? It was great for them to be able to be in that position to, okay, what do you need? We can make this work. Another one of the software programs that I used on the computer was Zoom Text, which is just, a zooming program where I'm able to make things bigger on the screen. And as technology has advanced, those that have Apple products, I specifically use Apple products because they have built in already, you don't have to go out and buy additional software. It's built in zooming magnification into the actual platform of the iOS.
Great. Alyssa, can you tell us about your technology and the pros and cons, or what works and doesn't?
Sure. So I'm lucky to be similar to Mike, where my employers were very accommodating when I didn't expect anything when I showed up. But when I got my first day on the job, I had a desk with 2 32-inch monitors. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that they had already accommodated me without me even having to ask. And thankfully, I haven't needed any other workplace accommodations other than there are some job duties that most of my other colleagues do that I'm not able to do, which is instruct in person in front of where the student is at a computer. So that I'm unable to do because the weather data on the student's computer screen is so detailed and small, especially if you're familiar with the National Weather Service's platform, it's very small. So I'm unable to do that, but for everything else, I'm able to do everything else that's required of my job. But one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet that I really use heavily in everyday life, at work too, but is pattern recognition. So I use colors and pattern recognition to identify things from a distance. So, for example, I have basically every popular brand logo memorized just by its colors. So if it's Coca-Cola, for example, I know that that's red and white, and the script of the C is very evident, the first capital C in Coca-Cola. So I use that a lot. I also use it in weather to, I've said this before on another AMS panel, but honestly, on the National Weather Service main webpage, that colorful map is I love it. I'm able to just look at the colors and know exactly what kind of weather is going on across the whole country. And what kind of advisories, watches, and warnings that are in effect at that time. So without that, it would be a struggle, more of a struggle for me to get that weather information that quickly. So color and being able to identify the patterns of scripts like text fonts and things like that really help me.
That's great. Just a quick follow-up, and anybody could take this. Is the technology getting better real quick? Or is it just been a kind of a slow and steady pace? I mean, have there been breakthroughs, or are you planning on next year using what you're using this year? Any takers?
Sure. So I go ahead. Go ahead and grab.
Well, I think one of the breakthroughs in technology are some of the iPhone apps that are out there now that allow you to scan and detect things, such as, you know, being able to scan a page of text that you might receive, say, in a meeting, or even in your mail, you know, whether this is personal or professional. And then you basically have easy, portable access to scanning almost anything, provided that it can recognize it. There's even progress in hand recognition of handwriting in that sense, and converting it to electronic text. I've used it to try to read my computer screen when the technology had crashed and I couldn't tell what's going on, even just to see if it's on. So I think those apps, they also provide you with light detection and color description. They also are starting to be able to describe to you what's around you. I haven't found that too practically useful yet, but I think there's a lot of progress in that sense. So I think there are technological advances.
Yeah, great, great. Mike, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, I remember when I first started interning, I was using the built-in magnifying glass on the Windows computers. And, you know, as technology and zooming software has become more available and now more implemented within technology, I feel like it definitely has taken an advancement for the better, for sure.
Great, great. Okay, well, let's move along. You guys are so upbeat and capable and everything else, but you've had to have some challenges. Can you talk about a challenge that you've had and kind of what brought it up? Is it kind of people's ignorance about your disability, or, you know, what kind of motivated it, and tips for the audience in that regard? Lily, do you want to start for us?
Since I'm still in my educational phase, I've gotten a lot of my challenges has been to learn. Oddly enough, I've been underestimated my ability. I have one really standout moment of being a freshman in college and going to my first professor I've ever met and telling them, like, I can't see, how can we accommodate in the classroom? This is chemistry class of all classes. Like, what am I supposed to expect? Well, I can't read subscripts that easily, stuff like that. And I remember being told, why are you taking my class? Why are you here? I don't know how I don't think you'll do well in this class. And I just looked at this professor in question. I was like, what? You don't know me. Like, I can do this. I'm here for a reason, to learn. And thankfully, after the first week of class happened and I got through the first week, And this was an old school professor using transparencies still in 2013 in classes. I think my professor started to learn that just judging based off of coming off of a disability or just being different didn't mean that I could not do what I can.
His interpretation is the disability trumps all the ability, apparently. So, or at least his initial interpretation. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. So thankfully I haven't faced a lot of those issues in the actual workplace, which I think is great. But even when I started off studying at the University of the Incarnate Word, one of my meteorology professors, who actually at the time was heading the broadcast department, when I told him that I wanted to go into broadcast meteorology, he definitely discouraged me in letting me know that this was something that required a lot of visual detail, and that it would be something that would be that he didn't think I could do. He actually discouraged me in a way of changing my major and into something called weather studies, which is something we didn't offer at the university. And I remember I was taking one of his classes, and one of the exams question was to draw a cold front on the surface map. And I remember looking at that map, and it was extremely difficult to read. It had all of these overlaying station plots, which was extremely, you weren't able to decipher the actual temperature, the dew point, because everything was overlapping. And it was absolutely a visual nightmare. And I remember taking this to the accessibility department at the time, saying, look, he wants me to do this. I said, I'm not able to. And she's like, gosh, I even have a hard time seeing this. And I pulled up for her an actual station plot map, on an NWS website. And I said, look, this is the way they had them spaced out. I said, you can see the cold front is, right here. So thankfully, they were able to provide an alternate map format to be able to accommodate in that regards. And so I think that in regards to an accommodation or just a visual disability of itself, like you had previously mentioned, the visual disability is just a small portion. It's not the entire outlook of someone.
Exactly. Alyssa, can you tell us about a challenge you've had?
Sure. So I've been fortunate. I did overcome several challenges, of course, during my academic career. But Mike and Lily have covered those pretty well. So my challenge in my adult life has been, well, in my career, I should say, is transportation. I live outside of Oklahoma City, and Oklahoma is not known for its accommodating public transit. And so there was a bus where I used to live where I could get to work, but I literally lived a mile away from work just so that I could walk there if I needed to. And it took me a half hour to get there. So, okay, I can deal with that, but it's not ideal. But then to get anywhere else, it took literally a half hour. If I needed to go to a doctor's appointment during a work day, I had to take off the whole morning because it literally took 4 hours for the whole round trip, which would have taken somebody who could drive a half hour. And then the density of the routes here is very lacking. I'm now in a location with no public transit because I had to make that choice of, thankfully, I have somebody who can be my transportation. But I had to make that difficult choice for other reasons. And I've been talking to city council for a couple of years now. I've tried talking to the old bus system that used to be run through the University of Oklahoma. Now it's run through the Oklahoma City bus system. And I have contacted them. I tried to apply for paratransit, and guess what? They denied me for paratransit. So this is still an ongoing battle. I'm waiting until the COVID cloud passes over, and there's some problems with our city council right now. So wait until that turnover might happen to just keep fighting. But when you don't live in a big city and you can't drive, it can be challenging.
Certainly sounds that way. Well, I know we all wish you luck with that, and let us know if we can help. Emka, want to talk about any of your challenges?
Yeah, I think for me, really the pretty much constant challenge, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a constant negative, but challenges aren't always negative, obviously. My constant challenge is accessibility to electronic information and software. Case in point today, for instance, is in the GoToWebinar app that I'm currently using on my iPad to participate in this webinar. There is a button that is labeled for me readable as microphone mute toggle button. Now, that doesn't tell you whether the mute is actually muted or unmuted. So I basically have to confirm by saying something to see if I can be heard in order to know whether I'm muted or not, or just by memory of what I pushed, whether what state I was last in. Other apps will say, mute microphone or unmute microphone or something that tells you which status you're in. Other examples are forms that I have to sign digitally at work can be not designed properly so that I can tell actually where I need to sign. So, I mean, it's great that electronic methods let me even be able to sign independently, but it depends on the person that designed the document actually making it accessible. And then I have training courses that I have to take online, and sometimes they are not accessible. They don't work with the screen reader very well. And so there's a list of things, and you never know which new tasks that you may encounter, new website, new app that you need to visit, or new training course you need to take, whether or not it's going to be accessible. Sometimes the first 9 screens are accessible and the 10th is not. Sometimes you fill out a form and you can put in all the information, but the submit button can't be read by the screen reader, so you can't click it. So there are many, so for anyone who is, tired of having to meet all kinds of requirements, especially those that may only serve a small group of people, making sure that your websites and applications, courses are accessible and really usable to people with using assistive technology is critical. It's a critical inclusion step, because people may turn away from whatever you're offering if they can, or at least get frustrated by inaccessibility. It's a very critical piece. So that is probably my biggest challenge.
Okay, thank you. So, I know people, are very willing to help people, but sometimes they don't know how to engage. So I wanted to ask the panelists if you have recommendations for, our audience, how and when, when and how, I guess really is the question, is it proper to offer assistance? Like if I were sitting next to Lily and she had, her, I forget what you called it out there that you were using, should I be offering any assistance or anything like that? Or what's the right protocol here? Mike, do you want to start us?
Sure. So I think it definitely depends on the situation. But let's say, you are in the scenario that you mentioned where, you're next to Lily and she has her binocular out, and she's looking at something. I would say if she seems like she's struggling, and if you're next to her or something, just kind of maybe hopefully you've already, gotten the main communication of, who this person is in somewhat of a way. And just asking basically, hey, do you need help, or can I give you a copy of my notes? Something like that would definitely help. I think for employers as well as professors, definitely more in a private setting when maybe you're doing some type of review with either the student or the employer, where you're going over maybe some type of a benchmark, whether it's been, an exam or in the work industry, when you've worked past the 3 months, basically that check-in, that check-up point of, hey, how are things going? At that point, maybe say, is there anything else that we can do for you? Is there anything that we can do to assist you with your job? Do you see any challenges, and what are those challenges, and how can we as a business help you overcome those challenges so that we are successful?
Great, great. Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
Not really. The biggest thing for me is please ask first. I have been like, as soon as I tell, it's happened on several occasions where as soon as I tell somebody that I'm visually impaired, or if, God forbid, I say legally blind, when you say the B word, blind, they automatically grab your arm and lead you to wherever you need to go. And no, don't, please don't do that. Just ask me what assistance I might need, and then we can get to where we're going. Normally, in those situations, I'm just asking for directions. I'm not asking you to lead me where I need to go. I can get there on my own, thank you. But just tell me where I need to go. But it's hard for us in that situation because you don't want to seem rude to the person who's trying to help you. So I usually just kind of go along with it and then tell them afterward, hey, I could have gotten there myself, but thank you. So it would be good if in the first place, if you just ask, yeah, what good intentions are great, but sometimes they can be a bit overbearing when you're on the receiving end.
Okay, great. I think we've gotten some really clear input on that, but let me just ask if Emka or Lily want to add anything to those answers.
I think those are all good points.
No, I've got my.
Oops, sorry. I think those are all good points, and it depends on the situation, and yeah, asking is important. And one other point might be, I guess, please don't take offense if somebody says, no, thank you, I'm fine. I've got it under control. And I would suggest not taking that as a sign of never asking anybody again, because there can be situations when I do not need any assistance, and others where I wish someone were asking me whether I needed assistance. So it's never wrong to ask.
Great. Lily, did you want to add anything?
I think Emka just said everything I wanted to say, so.
That's fine. We're running a little short on time. We'll take it. And we have some good questions. So what I'm going to propose we do is take some of the questions from the audience, and then we'll give each of the panelists a minute or so to wrap up at the end for that. So one of the questions is, I teach radar meteorology. Any ideas for how to represent radar data to those who are visually impaired? Sounds like it's touching a little bit on, Alyssa, what you had talked about with patterns and color, but.
True. I mean, if you do have some what we call residual vision, then just being able to have the color scales as large as possible. Like if you're looking at reflectivity, the DBZ, or velocity, though, be careful with that. There are people who are colorblind and they cannot see the velocity color table of red and green. So there are some, I know there are some color tables out there floating around, at least in the National Weather Service, that are colorblind friendly, but be aware of that too. But yeah, for me, it would just be that color scale and making it as large as possible. And Emka can give any input on her end if she'd like.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where it's very challenging to put a radar image into tactile form. I don't know of any way to do it. There are some tactile tablets. I have not explored options. It would very much depend on the purpose for which you want to make it the information accessible. One way might be numerically, if it's a small, maybe have some software that highlights the points of interest in terms of numbers. One might be to have a sighted person describe features of interest. It just depends on what the purpose is for needing to access it.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in here? If not, we could go to another question. The next question says, how are conferences both accessible and inaccessible for a visually impaired person? And I'd like to invite the panelists to feel free to single out AMS in this, either in a good example or a bad example. But I think hearing from a broader set of conferences would be great. Somebody want to start us out?
Sure. So I'll actually go ahead with my experience, if you don't mind. You know, in attending various AMS conferences, I felt like as long as, you know, I was at the point of signing up, I made sure to get a point of contact at AMS and, you know, letting them know of what I can and cannot see as far as accommodations. And, you know, when I've gotten there, day of, they've had, you know, the booklets available in large print and very accessible, friendly in my experience.
So I have some dirt, if you want to call it that. Actually, I'm involved with the National Weather Association as well, and they have been very accommodating to me. They asked me, I'm co-located with their office, so I know everybody over there, so that helps a little bit. But they asked me how things went accessibility wise, and they are able to give me access to the presentations so that I can follow along with all the PowerPoints on my tablet during the actual conference presentation. And I would really like it if AMS could do something similar. I tried to get that accomplished for Boston, but they said that the only way they could do it was if I brought my own HDMI something rather. I don't know what any of that means. And it sounded like it involved some kind of cord, which is a tripping hazard. So I would really appreciate it if we could figure out some sort of way to get AMS's system more accessible to being put like on the Google Drive, for example. That's what I use in the NWA, is just putting the presentations on the Google Drive, and then I can access them on my tablet or whatever anybody wanted to use.
That's a great suggestion. As your president, I'm happy to take on the challenge here. I will do a little brief thing here. You probably saw the announcement this week that we're, you know, going to be virtual for our annual meeting this year, and we have already done the mountain meteorology meeting that way earlier this month. And in that case, all the presentations were preloaded. The actual giving of the presentation was all done before the conference, so you could listen to them anytime. And with the conference time was really about a very small, you know, thing and a lot of Q&As. And we've talked also that once we've gone kind of virtual, we'll probably always bring some elements of that forward. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works this year. But I think your point is really well taken. Certainly seems like it could be accommodated. Anybody else want to add to this one?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that the social or connecting aspect of a physical conference, that if you are blind or have very restricted vision, then you aren't able to, say, see somebody across the room that you'd like to talk to, or for instance, find the speaker after the session, or find someone who asked a question in the session. And so I think for everybody out there who attends meetings, if you see someone or know someone who's blind or visually impaired and have a free moment or would like to talk to them or think they might want to talk to you, approaching them and letting them know you're there or initiating the conversation is really important for the social and networking purposes of meetings.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, the way I handle that usually is I get in touch with people ahead of time to get in
Right.
touch. And of course, nowadays we can also text people and such, but that is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Lily or Mike, did you want to add to this one? Okay, I'm not seeing anything burning. Let's go to the, oh, go ahead. So another question that we have is, I think the question is, what is one effort you would like to change for other visually impaired scientists in the future? So I think the question is, if you could change one thing to make it easier for other visually impaired people to make their, fullest contribution and, feel as comfortable as possible in our environment, what would be the one thing? It's a great question.
I would say the simple answer would be talk more. Like Imka was just saying, in social sessions or social aspects, come up and talk to me and remind me of your name. And for being in science in general, there are so many graphical aspects. So if you're a teacher or or presenting at a conference or any sort of presentation, just give more verbal descriptions. The more you talk, the more you can describe what you're talking about, the better off we are.
Great.
And I think another aspect here would be also making things as much accessible, like in a digital format as possible, especially when it comes to like presentations, just having that access ahead of time and making it as accessible as possible in a digital format, so that with screen readers or those of us that need to enlarge things are able to do that either prior to.
Mm-hmm. All great tips.
Yeah, another would be to.
Anybody want to add?
Yeah, another would be to always assume that something is possible. If you catch yourself, if people catch themselves thinking that, oh, this person shouldn't be in my chemistry class, or why are you even majoring in meteorology? Remember that you listened to this panel and that people can be in meteorology. And so it's really not a question of whether, but how somebody can do what needs to get done and get the education or do a job in your area of interest. And it's, I wish that more people had that kind of approach. And then where's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, so it's don't be making assumptions about that. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'd like to add, make connections. If you know one of us personally or not personally, but you know someone else who's visually impaired and starting in the field, especially in school. I didn't meet my first other visually impaired meteorologist until I was in grad school. So make those connections early. Having someone to ask questions about, especially in this field where there are visual aspects, then you might not know how to answer them, but we could potentially help them as well, as either in a mentorship or just to give advice.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Mike, did you want to add?
I just think everyone said it all great in regards to the mentorship and really reaching out, because maybe there's a challenge or something specifically that either you or a student or a colleague may be facing, and just referring them to us is kind of a liaison to be able to really help and help them overcome whatever it is, or provide advice and be able to guide them in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Yeah, I think we've had lots of great points. There was one other question here about back on the technology things, about how does it really all work with equations and things like that? Do the You know, do the text readers really manage differential equations, I guess is really the question. Anybody have?
No, they don't.
Okay. So you're really left to put those pieces together on your own.
Right, yeah, you have to have someone retype those for you in, say, a linear, you know, kind of maybe like how you would write it in a computer program or so. So for instance, rather than having a 1 and a fraction line and a 2, you can write 1/2, obviously. But, you know, with some of the differential equation notation, it's more challenging, but there are ways to write it linearly. So it can be read with speech or braille. And there are various ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Great, great. Right, I'm conscious of the time, so we need to start to wrap up here. I want to kind of summarize a few things I heard, but I want to ask the panelists if there's other points or things you'd like to leave the audience with, you know, before we sign off. Alyssa, do you have anything that you want to add that we haven't to?
I don't think so. The only other thing that I'd wanted to talk about is really specific. It's not really a takeaway point, but basically just ask us if we need help. Please be as verbal as possible. Reach out to us. Yeah, sorry, brain freeze. But yeah, just and know that we can do. Please don't assume that we can't do something, because we'll figure out a way to do it.
Great. Okay. Emka, did you want to add anything, or any
No, that's a good
points
summary, and I guess I'm hoping that maybe this is a way, as Lily was pointing out, I'm sure many of us or all of us would be ready to provide advice if you need any help, either because you are a person with a visual impairment or because you need to are accommodating someone or know somebody who needs could use some advice. And perhaps the AMS could think about being a resource and a central place where people can go to maybe be referred to assistance, either individuals or programs or so that provide more information on, say, accessibility guidelines and such.
Yeah. You know, to that point, one of the comments that we have, it's in the questions thing, is I'm an MWS meteorologist with a degenerative eye disease. So I found all of this very interesting and helpful. And you were all very inspirational. So I think I'm fair to say that if you want to reach out to any of our panelists through the AMS community, please feel free to do that, or myself to do it. Lily, did you have anything to add before we sign off?
I think Imka made it, I think Imka said it clearly earlier. It's not if we can do something, but it's how we can get something done. So just to take that extra step is worth it for anybody that might have any sort of differing ability.
Mm-hmm. Mike?
I would just leave y'all with these final words of, you know, never let anyone tell you that there's something that you cannot do. There always is a way around it. And, you know, just keep shooting for the stars, guys. The world's your limit.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am here. I think in disability, it should be a small d and a capital A in ability is the way we should think about this. And I think, you know, the other takeaway from me is that things that are relatively easy to do, we probably don't do enough. I think the commenting on social aspects earlier is something we can all do. And we probably take that for granted in not doing that enough. And couldn't we all use more social contact these days? I can't wait to get that vaccine and get out there again. But I think that's important. And the idea of, you know, help is really defined by the recipient. My husband always used to say that. So if you think you're helping, you should double check first whether somebody actually needs help for that. So thank you all. This has been a great panel and a great discussion. And thanks to the audience, we had just about 100 attendees. So it's a great turnout here. And this is being recorded. This has been recorded. So it's here for reference for people to go back to. So thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon. I think everybody should be pretty much in their afternoon or evening by now. Thank you.